Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, John Bedker. Well, today we're going to talk about unifying leadership. Make a case for unifying leadership. Here we are in the hot summer months of the end of July. I think it's a good time to kind of take stock, particularly today when the U.S. Congress of the United States has chosen to close for business. Take a month or more off and then return to Washington in the fall. This without passing one single appropriations bill to keep the government of the United States funded. So, not a lot of work getting done, certainly not a lot of unifying leadership being displayed. Well, we'll talk a little bit today about how we got there, and then we'll talk about maybe what the other side can do. Now, I mention this all, of course, in the very central understanding that this podcast is all about leadership. Not politics, not government, not any of these things that might look like some agenda going on. The agenda going on for this podcast is absolutely and clearly and unmistakably about leadership. And as I say repeatedly, leadership is about doing the right thing. We know the difference. The difference, frankly, is clear between doing the right thing and the wrong thing. However, it's oftentimes really difficult, hard, to do the right thing. People feel a need to just guard ferociously their rigid ideologies, their fealty to President Donald Trump. We'll talk about that a little bit. Because what the Republican Party has done, and they've done with excellence, let me make that clear, with excellence, is to message to the American people in a way that has won them control of the U.S. House of Representatives, the United States Senate, the presidency of the United States, and they have been able to find fealty given to the executive branch at the expense of the constitutional requirements of the legislative and the judicial branch. So the Congress of the United States, the Supreme Court of the United States, has largely found themselves falling in line with the fealty asked by President Trump and given to him by these two absolutely co-equal branches of government. Okay, so there's a little backdrop, a little background. The Republicans have just been excellent, superb at messaging, telling a story, however inaccurate, but telling a story that is so compelling that it has won the votes in the 2024 election. Yeah, they control the Congress, they control the Senate, and they elected Donald Trump, the Republican President of the United States. They've had incredible success in Trump being allowed to effectively dictate to the Congress what he wants done and having them fall in step, not in representation of their constituents, but in their fealty to Donald Trump. And similarly, the Supreme Court of the United States, the 6 conservative justices, largely voting 6-3, 6-3, 6-3 on issue and case after case. Again, displaying fealty, regardless of the Constitution, the law, facts, evidence, fealty to Donald Trump. Which brings us to today, and the topic, again, not political, but leadership. Is any of that the right thing? Are we doing the right thing? Because if we are, then we really ought to be grateful. Well, I'm going to make the case that that's not so. And what I'm going to do is read from an article, guest essay, written July 21st for the New York Times. It's a guest essay by James Carville. Many of you may know that name, but he is a bit of an icon, a veteran of many campaigns, including presidential campaigns, most notably Bill Clinton's in 1992. He currently is a pundit, talks regularly, talks frequently. He's also a consultant to the American Bridge, a Democratic super PAC. Okay, so he comes in with a long history and a full body of work. And he wrote this guest essay called My Fix for the Confused and Leaderless Democrats. Again, the guest essay in the New York Times. Begins like this. Let me quote. Constipated, leaderless, confused, a cracked out clown car, divided. These are the words I hear my fellow Democrats using to describe our party as of late. The truth is, they're not wrong. The Democratic Party is in shambles. Now, before I go back to the article, let me just say that Carville sets the tone right up front. But what is he saying from a leadership point of view? What he's saying is that this all-important messaging, telling a truthful story, has not penetrated the American voter. They have not gotten the truthful message in a compelling way across to voters. Okay. So, here's Carville again, quoting. The Democratic Party is steamrolling toward a civilized civil war. It's necessary to have it. It's even more necessary to delay it. The only thing that can save us now is an actual savior, because a new party can be delivered only by a person. He references Barack Obama in 2008 and Bill Clinton in 1992. No matter how many podcasts or influencer streams our candidates go on, our new leader won't arrive until the day after the midterms in November 2026, which marks the unofficial yet official beginning of the 2028 presidential primary contest. No new party or candidate has a chance for a breakthrough until that day. So he's setting the stage here by giving this framework for how important it is going to be to have this absolutely compelling message for the American electorate. But he makes clear that that won't happen today or tomorrow. And while we see this party in shambles, as he describes it in this essay, it's not without hope. And let me stress that, because leaders must have hope. We have to have hope. We have to believe. Again, not in the party affiliation or ideology or, left, right, conservative, liberal. Forget all that. We have to think about doing the right thing. So, what does Carville say until this breakthrough after the midterm elections? He says, until then, we must run unified in opposition to the Republicans to gain as many House seats as possible in the midterms, because every congressional seat we gain in 2026 means we will be more likely to bring about change in 2028. That's the presidential year. And there's good news on that front. And again, finishing with hope. So let's take that leadership lesson right there. Always, 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 whenever you can. But bring about hope as that closing statement. There's a tantalizing political scandal surrounding the president right now. But issues of moral or ethical concern are almost always more powerful when they're self-inflicted. Carville says, let President Trump rope-a-dope with MAGA on the Jeffrey Epstein case and don't get in the way. Instead, the midterms will, like all elections, be decided largely based on issues that affect Americans' everyday lives. And now we're going to get to this change in the messaging, okay? Which I think is really important for us to understand this idea, this concept of unifying leadership. How do we go about it? How do we do it? How do we project it? How do we execute unifying leadership? Okay, here's Carville again from the essay. This time around, we don't have to run with a shred of nuance when it comes to kitchen table issues. Mr. Trump's, quote, big, beautiful, end quote, domestic policy law is a big, steaming, doggy nugget of epic proportion. That's James Carville. It's contemptible, Carville says, to a vast majority of the nation. According to a new CNN poll, over 60% of Americans were opposed to Mr. Trump's bill. For context, in his first term, back in 2017, he dropped a budget bill, and the split was closer, about 41% opposed and 28% in favor. Now it's far, far more people not in favor. The midterm march starts with a simple phrase. Every candidate can blast out on every screen and stage. We demand a repeal. Let me say that again. Carville's saying this simple phrase that every candidate can blast on every screen and stage. We demand a repeal. That's the messaging. Keep it simple, right? The KISS principle. And what Carville's saying is, absolutely, let's do that. Keep it simple. What do we really want to do? Talk about the man, talk about the party, talk about this and that, whatever? No. We're going to talk about this bill because the bill affects you and affects you in your home, with your family, in your life, literally at your kitchen table. Demand a repeal. Here's Carville again. A repeal of Mr. Trump's spending law is the one word that should define the midterms. It is clear, forceful, and full-throated. It must be slathered across every poster, every ad, every social media post from now until November 2026. That single word is our core message. And here you have it, folks, the exercise of leadership. To have a core message, to have it included every single time you would go in front of a microphone. Speak to people, speak to voters. That single word is the core message, repeal. Every Democrat can run on it with outrage directed not at the president or a person, but at this disastrous bill. And the reasons are countless. Each one, venom-tipped political dagger. That's Carville talking. We demand a repeal to protect Medicaid. Mr. Trump's law will slash roughly $1.1 trillion from healthcare programs, stripping coverage from an estimated 11.8 million people over the next decade. This will lead to a shuttering of rural hospitals and facilities, leaving people in red and purple states without vital health care. It'll certainly do the same in blue states, folks. A vast majority of the public supports Medicaid. This is a unifying issue. We must demand a repeal of the law. So what Carville is doing here is now detailing, annotating his case for this one-word message: repeal the law. We demand a repeal to save the deficit. Not only will the new policy explode the national debt, the Congressional Budget Office estimates it could add $3.3 trillion. Yes, I said that correctly, $3.3 trillion over the next 10 years. But it will also take money away from the poorest 20% of Americans. According to analysis from Yale University's Budget Lab, a nonpartisan research center, households in the top 20%, just for a frame of reference, that means people earning over $120,000 a year, stand to gain roughly $5,700 annually by what Trump calls this big, beautiful bill. By contrast, the poorest 20%, again, what does that mean? That means people making under $13,350 annually would see their incomes shrink by about $700 a year. Could it be more obvious, Carville states? We demand a repeal. Well, Carville goes on to state a few more items. Let me just mention a few. We demand a repeal to end the endless wars because the bill boosts military spending to $1 trillion for the very first time. We demand a repeal for students who are losing loan protections or who may no longer be eligible for Pell Grants. We demand a repeal for working families, children, seniors, who could go hungry because the bill is estimated to demolish SNAP by over $180 billion. Carville concludes his article by saying this: we've never had a simpler, more unifying oppositional message. Soon it will no longer be possible to avoid a brawl between the factions ignited back in the 2016 Democratic presidential primaries. But for now, whether you're in the progressive wing of the party, centrist wing of the party, again, we might say Mr. Mondami or Abigail Spanberger running for governor in Virginia, or even Elon Musk, we can all agree on one thing. We demand a repeal. And so what Carville is saying is We need to unify. We need to get together on a message. We need that messaging to be clear. We need it to be concise. As I said, KISS, keep it simple, because it will affect you. Unless you're at the top of the income schemes and have taken all the appropriate steps to maximize your opportunities of wealth, you may very well be hurt. And you may be hurt significantly because of spending, because of deficits, because of food, because of health care. A to Z. This message, repeal, because this bill affected each and every one of those. This so-called big, beautiful bill is anything but, as Carville describes it, quite the opposite. And so messaging is a unifying leadership opportunity here. Why? Not political, not to take a side, but to do the right thing. That is the call to action. Do the right thing. It's unifying because it will help. It will, in fact, address we the people rather than the very few at the top, rather than those with fealty only to Trump, rather than their neighbor, rather than those they serve. It is a credible opportunity, folks, for each of us. I'm talking about this national debate we're having now coming into the midterms next year, and in 2028, the presidential election. But you can feel it and sense it in your own organizations, in your own institutions. Those you work for and those that work for you. Be a unifier. Bring unifying leadership to your practice of leadership. Why? Because people will benefit. The rising tide does, in fact, raise all boats. And that is a call to leadership. That is the right thing. And with that, I'm going to stop. But I'm saying, folks, this message of unifying leadership, article I read from Carville, but many other debates and discussions that are going on, people commenting on the messaging excellence of the Republicans and the poor messaging by the Democrats, really could be turned around, so that misinformation, disinformation, and tragically lying is caught, and that people unifying others to raise all boats, to recognize the Constitution of we the people, would have a real opportunity. All right, so let's think about unifying leadership in our individual and personal practices, in our lives, but let's also think about it globally. Okay? Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Take care. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and, of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.